Have you ever had the perfect romantasy idea, but then when you started thinking about writing a story, everything seemed so overwhelming?
Take a deep breath, because today I'm going to go over everything you need to write your first romantasy novel. Romantasy is, at the most basic level, a combination of romance and fantasy. And you might say, yeah, that's obvious, but there are some nuances to it that you may not realize. The primary nuance that you need to keep in mind is that the plot must be tied to the romance. On the surface level, this might seem pretty simple, but in reality, it's actually a little bit more complicated than you might think. There are a lot of books claiming to be romantasy that don't exactly have a plot tied into the romance. So what do I mean by this? Well, if you look at Light Lark, I would argue that this is trying to be a romantasy novel. Now, Light Lark leaves a lot to be desired in the writing, but ultimately Alex Astor tries to tie the plot into the romance by making it so that the powers are reliant on the romances. However, the only point you actually see this really being relevant in the book is at the very end when King Oro rescues Isla when she's falling down into the chasm. And because they love each other, he throws a vine at her using the wildling powers in order to rescue her. This really isn't necessary to the plot. There could be just something else that could save her that doesn't need to be tied into the romance, and this is really the only aspect throughout the entire book of Light Lark that the true love aspect of the magic system comes into play. It's not really positioned anywhere else, it's just kind of hinted at. However, if you look at the Bonds That Tie series, the plot would fall apart if you didn't have the idea of the fated pairs or the fated mates with the bonds. Without the bond system in place, we wouldn't have a story, because ultimately then the bad guy wouldn't have any reason to be going after the hero, nor would there be any reason for the non-gifted people to be having issues with the gifted people, because it's the bonds that give the gifted people their gifts. I'd love to hear what your favorite romantasy novel is, so definitely be sure to comment it. But now we're going to talk about the most important thing to consider when you're writing a romantasy novel, and that is your archetypes, because that's what your reader is looking for. Readers typically pick their next romantasy novel based on what the archetype is a little bit more than the plot, because ultimately they're there for the romance element, right? So one of the most popular archetypes is the enemies to lovers trope. Broken Bonds uses it for the foundation of the novel. You see it in Throne of Glass. You see it in a lot of different places throughout the romantasy setting because it's so popular. So the things you want to focus on when you're trying to write an enemies to lovers novel is that you want to start by having a lot of tension at the beginning. The love interests need to sort of feel misunderstood towards one another, and then as their character arc develops, they start to understand where each other is coming from and seeing each other's points of views until eventually in the end they agree on their final goal. At the start of the enemies to lovers character arc, you often see the two characters tied together, where one of the characters is sort of in a subservient role to another one. One of the next most common archetypes is the fated mates, and that is the archetype used in Broken Bonds. You see it because they are destined to love each other. They literally have DNA markers in their blood that say that they are supposed to fall in love. I also feel like this one is fairly self-explanatory. There just has to be some sort of external force that ties these two together. Some areas that you can see conflict in this is that maybe the fated mates don't quite get along, or one of them doesn't really want to have a relationship with their fated mate. Maybe they start off thinking that they're similar, but then they find out that they have a lot of dissimilarities, and they have to grow closer by getting over those conflicts together. Now this next one is for my dark romance girlies, and that is the don't touch her or you're going to die trope. This one I secretly love, I'm not gonna lie. There's just something about the intensity of the morally gray characters that I really fall in love with, and that is one of the key components to this archetype, is that your male love interest is in a morally gray area. There's often a hugely possessive component to this one, of course, and the trope thrives on danger. So you want to be creating circumstances that push the boundaries of this character. His overprotectiveness probably also includes jealousy. So the thing that readers really love from this trope is that they find security. There's a sense of security and there's also a sense of danger, which sounds like it wouldn't go hand in hand, but it's just really romantic to think about a man trying to protect you at all costs. The most important thing to consider is that this needs to empower your heroine. A great situation that this trope would thrive in is people fighting against some kind of evil entity. And because of the male love interest's moral character, you need to make sure that the entity is really obviously evil. There can't be any good leanings in that entity at all, because you need to make the male love interest kind of seem good in his protectiveness. And she finds security in his partnership so that she's not worried about going out to fight the bad guys as long as she's with him. You could also create some tension with this by separating them, and then the female love interest is about to die and then he comes in and saves her. And then the last trope, which is my absolute favorite, is who did this to you? I love this trope so much because I love when characters go unhinged. Maybe I should talk to somebody about that. Sometimes I just love when a man goes crazy and kills everybody just because I've been hurt. Do you think that's a problem? No? Oh, wonderful. Great. Okay. This trope really thrives in the enemies to lovers environment, and oftentimes it starts with the male love interest being cold, callous, disinterested, and maybe even a little bit mean to our main character. And then he develops a fierce, fierce protectiveness to the point where if there's any emotional or physical damage, he goes apeshit. Now, hopefully I've made it obvious, but if I haven't, this trope is often accompanied by vengeance. The male love interest goes off and goes and tries to get revenge for whatever has happened to the main female character, to the point where he almost seems like he's lost his mind. Or maybe that's just how I like it. I don't know. Maybe he's supposed to be a little bit more rooted in rationality. What do you think? Let me know in the comments. This one, just like the last one, is also really good for dark romance, so if that's what you're writing, definitely consider putting this archetype in. This one has that same intense possessiveness that you would see in the Who Did This To You one, but I think that this one arguably doesn't do it as strongly. None of this is set in stone, so if you want to make him super possessive once he gets to the Who Did This To You point, then go for it. Rules are made to be broken. So next we're going to talk about some common plot devices that you might find in the Romantasy genre. We'll cover a few of the best ones so that you can consider them when you're writing your novel. And the first one I want to talk about is the love triangle. We probably all know what this is, but it's where you have one female character and two male characters. The male characters sort of fight over the female character and sort of vie for her attention. And the most common issue I see with this trope is that the protagonist ends up choosing the wrong one in the end. Twilight is an excellent example of this. Bella is quite obviously in love with Jacob, but then at a basic level, she's only infatuated by Edward, yet in the end, she picks Edward anyway. He's not even a vampire. She can call him a vampire all she wants, he's not a vampire. He's just he's just a slightly aggressive fae, okay? He sparkles, it's not a vampire, okay? I think we've all accepted that at this point, but it still bothers me. Maybe I need to talk to my plant some more, get it over with, but Naruto has a great example of this actually, because the initial love triangle is between Sakura, Naruto, and Sasuke, and there's this great point where Naruto chooses love, and I'm so happy. Love triangles thrive on the tension created between the two characters fighting over the female. And oftentimes one of them is jealous and possessive and the other one might be a little bit more aloof. But you can honestly do a lot of different things with this plot device. It's just a matter of creating good character arcs. And the next common plot device is the found family. And with this one, you really want to have a main character who feels kind of left out. She might feel like she doesn't fit in with her main family or like she's been abandoned by them. And then the main love interest becomes her family and she grows to love them and is like, oh, I found where I belong. The movie Avatar is a found family story, but the main thing you want to focus on is really establishing the exposition well. So you want to establish where the character came from, who she is, and who she's going to become. Be sure you have that promise element of who she's going to become in there, because without it, the readers don't really know where they're going, and they may not really care about the direction of the story, and they may end up putting the book down. So what you want to do is have a good, firm, solid beginning, because that is where all of your heavy lifting is going to be to get your reader hooked. And I know that kind of applies to every book, but it's especially important in the found family, because the reader has to understand that your character doesn't feel like they have a place. And the last one, which is the most important, is the slow burn. And we're going to talk about why at the end of the video when I talk about things to avoid, but the most important thing you can do to write a romance well is to focus on the slow burn. Every romance that is done well is a slow burn romance, because if the fire burns too hot right away, it's going to fizzle out. You need to start the flame low to get the water boiling and then reach the climax and boil over. This is where show don't tell really comes into play. And if you want to know more about show don't tell, then be sure to subscribe, because next week I will be going over exactly how you can use show don't tell in your romantasy novels to demonstrate that the characters are falling in love. I saw this really clearly when I was reading The Duke and I recently, because initially the characters weren't really attracted to each other. There was a business-like transaction for why they're going to pretend that they're going to fall in love, and then they actually did fall in love. Now we're going to talk about things to avoid, and the biggest one, which is also the most difficult one, is creating a balance between romance and fantasy. Oftentimes, romantasy novels make the mistake of leaning either too far into fantasy or too far into romance. You see this in the Bonds That Tie books 2 through 6, which is most of the story. Each of those novels has the same exact plot, and they also follow the same exact pacing, so there's really not a difference between the novels. It feels kind of clunky to read, because you'll have a really long passage where it's all romance, and then you'll have a really long passage where it's all fantasy. Try to incorporate fantasy elements with your romance elements, whether that's, going on a date in a fantasy setting. And I think one of the places that the Bonds That Tie kind of failed in this was that the author put the setting on Earth in a dystopian Earth. The novel was trying to do too many genres. It was dystopian, it was fantasy, it was romance. It was trying to do too many things in one book and didn't really have a focus, and you could see that in the final product. You also see this in Lightlark, which I talked about earlier, where Lightlark is like 90%, probably more than that, probably 95% fantasy with 5% romance. Another one that you see is an overpowered main character. This one is really hard because I think we all really love our character and we just want to make them really strong, and there's all these like epic examples in movies of characters doing epic things, and so when you're actually sitting down to write, you have a really hard time not making your main character overpowered. So it's important that you give them a growth curve. Have them start off weak or unable to do things, and then over time show how they grow. And going back to the Bonds That Tie, I talked about this in one of my other videos, I'll have it linked on the screen, but the issue with Oleander Fallow's character is that after book 1, her power is held in check by plot devices, and that's not a very good way to do it. It made the ending really obvious for me, and it didn't actually give Oleander any kind of growth arc, because her power was already there. She just needed to bond with her bonds. Rather than just using, oh, she's not strong enough because she hasn't bonded as the reason why she couldn't just kill the bad guy, she could have spent more time developing the actual romance between the characters and making it more of a slow burn. The next one I want to talk about is Too Dumb to Live heroines. This one is especially common when you're making your archetype one of the dark romance ones that I talked about, either the Who Did This to You or Touch Her and You Die characters, because you have to put your character in a situation where that trope is triggered, but it's unrealistic to have characters that are that dumb. It's also hard for your reader to connect and empathize with the character when they feel like the character is stupid. That's just annoying. So make sure that you're not making your character too dumb to live. The last one is insta-lust, and this is where the slow burn is so important. A lot of times you see characters in romantasy novels just instantly lusting after each other. This is a big part of broken bonds, bonds, and later she kind of explains it as she explains where the bonds come from. The way that it's done is not really satisfying. Like, all of the men that Oleander Fellows was supposed to bond with were instantly like, oh, I'll do everything to take care of you. I will funnel my money into you. And they say that the only reason they don't is because she ran away for 2 years. In no society is a multimillionaire going to be willing to just funnel his money into somebody he's never met. It's just unrealistic. Hopefully now you feel empowered to write your romantasy novel. So tell me which archetype you're going to pick for your romantasy novel in the comments, and if you want to write killer dialogue that will hook your readers every time, then click the video on the screen. I'll see you next week. Bye bye!